Cool, that seems to be on. So welcome all. I don't see any new faces actually. I see more old faces than anything, but that's a good thing as well. Yes, it has been a long time.
Is that a comment on the people who are here or our faces?
I was going to say, I thought I looked quite fresh today, actually.
So as far as the agenda goes, we don't have anything under meta discussion, but we can talk about the time for the next meeting in a couple of months. Moving on to ID/editor/tools, I believe a lot of this is going to be from Googler, so please take it away.
Yeah, I think I added a few items a couple weeks ago when you reminded me. So I will go through these quickly. If anyone is interested in hearing more, please stop me. The first item is a telemetry update, which I think might be interesting to folks here. So in GoPlease v0.14.0, we, for the first time, included telemetry, opt-in telemetry integration. We're trying to be very careful to always preface that as opt-in. At the time, I think we didn't really publicize it much. We just sort of, I think I advertised it in the release notes and maybe mentioned something in Slack. And it seemed like we got around 50 people, 30 to 50 people. It's hard to count exactly depending on who opens their editor when, but around, say, 50 people who voluntarily, with no particular advertising, discovered telemetry and enabled it. I think about half of those are on the Go team, and a good number of the other participants are here. So thank you for that. We much appreciate that. I should say we're trying, that's fine. That's totally fine with us. We're trying to move very slowly here because we think telemetry can and will be a game changer for us, allowing us to achieve a lot of things that we weren't able to achieve before in terms of reliability and prioritization and performance. And the last thing we want to do is spoil that by moving too fast. So thus far, even with 50 people, it was useful because we had a bunch of instrumentation for impossible conditions in GoPlease that would panic in tests. So we use those to catch things in tests, and we can use them in our own local session. But what we quickly discovered is that many of these conditions were being encountered by people, and we just weren't seeing them. But with telemetry enabled, we were able to see them for the first time. So that was really cool.
Often because of error.error or unsafe.pointer being edge cases in a whole bunch of algorithms.
About half of them relate to errors.error or error.error method or some sort of built-in edge case, which we kind of anticipated. And the reason we have that bug report is specifically because we used to panic in those impossible conditions, and we had many panics and crashers related to error.error. So not panicking is better, but now we're able to both not panic and see the broken invariants. So that's cool. And telemetry seemed to be working fine. I mean, it's still very much like a rough implementation. We're trying to prove the concept before we spend more time on it. But with the VS Code 40 release, which went out 2 weeks ago, we actually included a prompt for the first time. So 0.1% of users who have already opted into VS Code telemetry are prompted to enable Go telemetry. It's just a show message request pop up in the corner of their screen asking if they want to help out by enabling telemetry. So we estimate, we actually have no idea because we have no telemetry, but we estimate that we have around 500,000 weekly active users whose telemetry we would have just started to see because of a delay. There's like an 8-day delay built into it. We would have just started to see over the weekend, and it looks like we picked up probably around 200 to 300 more participants in telemetry as a result of that. So if we estimate that we prompted 500 people in that week and got 300 to say 250 or 300 new participants, that's a pretty good response rate. Perfectly acceptable for us. And we also haven't heard any complaints about the notifications. So we're probably going to move that forward to like 1% before the end of the year, but we're still going to move slowly and evaluate people's reaction. So I think, folks here contribute to various LSP clients. There is the possibility that other LSP clients could enable this prompt as well if they want, but we're not asking for that currently. So right now you'll see that as a result of the VS Code prompt, VS Code is disproportionately represented in our telemetry data. That's fine for the information we want to collect currently, but we would like to get a better sample in the future. Sorry, that was more than I wanted to say, but it's just, I find it very interesting. Yeah, Dan.
Can you do the prompting to ask to enable telemetry in a way that is not editor specific, out of curiosity?
Yeah, it's implemented in GoPlease. So there is actually a hidden GoPlease setting called, I think it's called enable telemetry prompt or something like that, which is off by default. But if an editor were to splice in that setting to true, then GoPlease would manage the prompting for the editor. And it has, it has logic built into it to say not prompt too many times. If people keep dismissing the prompt and not responding to it, we'll eventually give up, things like that. Sorry, does that, I'm not sure I actually understood your question. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess more than anything, I was wondering if the LSP protocol has like a show dialogue or like show prompt.
It does. Yeah,
yes,
it does.
It does. It's very limited.
It's very limited, yeah. We want to build something more rich so we can have real dialogues about refactorings. But right now you can ask a simple, like an even valued question.
Yeah, so that's exciting for us. Small though it may be, it's a small step, but giant leap. And then the other stuff we're working on is refactoring, which we also landed in the v0.14 release. Alan did a bunch of really great work implementing a very careful and precise inliner, which right now you can use it for inlining, but it can also serve as a basis for a lot more refactoring in the future. It's more generally a tool for rewriting code, which we want to build on. Before we move on to that, on telemetry, is just we found a very simple algorithm for deduping the stacks that we get from our bug reports, which is just that you report stacks using function declaration of relative line numbers rather than absolute line numbers, which means that minor variations in the source don't sort of create duplicates. You take a hash of the stack and compress it in base64 effectively, and use those as sort of identifiers and just put them in the GitHub issues. And we've been able to find that we can automate the sort of deduping of new reports by just computing this hash and searching for existing records and then just annotating those existing records. So it's actually quite an efficient way to deal with incoming reports. That was all I wanted to add. Yeah, that's been really useful. Because we're finding that as we get more reports, it's harder for us to wade through the data manually, and so we'll be developing processes like that going forward. But Alan wrote this really useful tool that produces a lot of bugs that you'll see, and we've been collecting. I think as I pointed out in Slack, we've been collecting bugs that are related to telemetry, so we can sort of evaluate its effectiveness as we go. So yeah, I was saying we have been working on refactoring and plan to continue to work on that in 2024. That's one of our major priorities. And then currently I'm working on what we call zero config GoPlease, or that's what I call it, which is basically just if you open a Go file, we should figure out what build you're trying to work on and configure that automatically for you. This is, I think, one of the major pain points that our users have, which is they open the wrong directory, they open their home directory, and then they open a Go file, and GoPlease spits some variation of a very confusing error message. We've tried to improve that error message along the way, but we could just do the right thing. So that's what I'm working on. So this year, I will just say, has been a lot of sort of fundamental work on GoPlease. We did a lot of the scaling work over the summer and in the spring, and now we're working on this refactoring to enable a zero configuration model. We're also, as Paul pointed out in Slack, we're doing a lot of package refactoring. Our goal is to not do that for the most of 2024. Our goal in 2024 is to focus on fixing bugs and hardening and improving our documentation and contributor guide, and then focus on new features like refactoring. So it feels like there's been a lot of churn, but our goal is to calm that down.
And in refactoring, it would be worth noting that one of the things we'd like to solve is the long-standing problem that AST comments are not reliably held in the tree. They held in the side table and they get jumbled up whenever you move things around. And it seems like a prerequisite for any sophisticated refactoring that we solve that problem. And we have one design that we think we might be able to get to a point where we can actually merge it into the standard library next year. But there's obviously many unknowns we have to discover before then. Dan.
That's a good point. You did raise that CL for AST comments some while back. Do you intend to get back to it at some point?
I do, yes, exactly.
I mean, based on the refactoring work that we did in like September for the inlining, it's so frustrating. Like it's got to be the first thing we fix before moving forward. So that's on the horizon. That AST change is on the horizon, and that actually leads naturally into the next item, which is alias support in Go types. So it has been a long-standing pain point that Go types doesn't represent aliases faithfully. It was, I think at the time, it was convenient to pretend that aliases don't exist. But as a result, Go Please has a ton of annoying. Oh, great. Yeah. Daniel says Dominic's really happy about alias support. True. And we're very excited because Go Please has a ton of workarounds where we try to navigate to the syntax. However, it will be a ton of work to make this change. So it is a breaking change, but we have to, well, not a breaking change in the sense of backwards compatibility, but it breaks a lot of existing models for operating on types.
It sort of is an incompatible change in the sense that your sum types now have an extra case in them that you have to extend every type switch to accommodate.
What do you call a breaking change that is necessary because the language is changing and the current model for representing types doesn't work? I don't know. It's going to, in order for people to support Go 123, which will have type parameters on aliases, we expect, they will have to adopt this new representation. Yes, a well-deserved breaking change. Okay. So we have one cycle, which is the 122 dev cycle, to use the new APIs. So you can use them now and update code to handle the existence of an alias node in the type graph. And then in 123, you will have to have this support because we have to have a place to store type parameters. Yeah, in retrospect, maybe we could have had the type parameters on the type name, but that ship has sailed. So this change is required. Dan.
I seem to recall that Dominic said that in 122 he can already start testing the alias support, so he will do that. I actually cannot on the project that I need it for because I need it to be supported for export data, which you mentioned is 123. So I think I can probably test it at a basic level, but I can't properly until 123.
Do you mean go? Sorry, go ahead.
Go on.
So we had discussed, you're using Go packages, right?
Yes.
We could have a shim. I'm looking to Alan for his opinion on this, but we could have a shim in Go packages, perhaps, if you wanted to start testing this, that would do source checking instead of export data checking.
I'm sorry, I don't use Go packages, no. I use Go types and importer directly.
Got it.
So I think the idea is we're going to stage the change. So the first release will do create the types, but not instantiate them at any point. And so that way you'll be able to extend your type switches with logic ready for when these values start to appear. And then the next release will actually release them. And so it'll start creating these values. And so this introduces a new case without breaking anyone in a single release.
I'll maybe clarify, maybe this is what you were saying, but if the Go experiment is set, then Go types will produce aliases when it type checks them. It will produce alias nodes when it type checks them. It's not just that the API exists for you to compile.
So at least you could test your code with the new cases.
Yeah, exactly. So I've been talking for a while, and I'm done.
I believe the next item is mine. This is one that Dominic asked me to add to the agenda and bring up in his name. He's wondering if the user CGO support in Go types is something that will be a redirector at some point, because it seems like it's internally used by GoPlease, but he needs it for static check to provide good error messages. And then that feeds back into GoPlease, right? And GoPlease has this internal support. So he's a bit confused about the state.
Yeah, I can talk about this. First of all, sorry, we shouldn't have done this. And there are a couple other places where we bypassed the public APIs that we have tried to walk back. I think Alan did a good job of filing proposals for those things, but this one we haven't fixed. And I think the reason is in part that we just haven't gotten to it, but also in part because per one of the comments that Matthew left on the issue, it's not entirely correct, I think. Like there's a issue comment in there, which I can't remember precisely, but there are various problems with this, right? Like the C import will have in its scope everything, I think precisely everything that is used by the package, which is incorrect in two ways. It won't have everything that could be used. So it won't express everything that's available to, say, auto-completion in that scope, but it also will have I can't remember the second half of that, but there are various problems with this that make it kind of unclean, but yet good enough for GoPlease. I think it's a little bit too unclean for a proposal. Sorry, I don't have much more to say about it than that. If someone can come up with a concrete proposal for this, I think we'd happily accept it, but we just haven't spent the time to work this out.
I'm going to assume that Dominic will watch this recording, and if he's not satisfied with that response, he can always just leave a comment. But yeah, that sounds good. I actually don't know whose the next item is. Go types heads up.
Oh, that's me. So in the course of fixing a bug in renaming in GoPlease, I discovered a bug in Go types in which the sort of scope, the nested scopes that represent the lexical environment, there was sort of some fuzziness about where things begin and end, and especially with respect to function declarations. And I fixed what I think is a bug, but in doing so, I've changed the positions associated with scopes, and so the one that's now the one that's associated with the function, including all the parameters and the locals inside the function, now has the extent of the whole function declaration, including the func token at the beginning, not just the curly braces of the body. Now, hopefully, no one should care, but everyone cares about every detail in the limit, and we found places where code was written that sort of sloppily compared for equality of these things, and that code was broken. And so just be careful if you're doing scope position calculations, you might want to keep an eye on this change. That's all.
And I believe the last item is polls.
Thanks. I jammed this on last minute. Apologies. I only notified on Slack that I wanted to chat about this earlier. So happy to push this to the end, Rob, Alan, if now's not a good time to talk about it. But just as a bit of background, when GoPlease first started as a project in Golang.org xtools, I created GoVim alongside that as a client of an LSP client, and vended in the loosest possible sense some of the internals of GoPlease in order to sort of avoid writing out stuff myself. That's still the case. There's still some vendoring that actually happens. But what we'd like to do now on the Q project is actually start to build out an actual LSP server as well. And again, I'm looking to sort of reuse as much as possible. As I said in my comment on Slack, though, fully understanding that internals expose us to changes because, make us expose us to breaking changes because stuff is internal. So I've seen a load of really nice refactorings happening, stuff moving places. I really just want to understand when a good logical point would be for me to look at Golang.org xtools and sort of snapshot, for want of a better phrase, those bits, and then Rob, Alan, sort of work with you to sort of try and understand how not to block you on certain things, but at the same time to sort of try and get the best of both worlds if there are bits that, again, much like Roger did with, dare I say, Roger Pepe Go internal, where we took some of the internals of Command Go and factored those out. But perhaps a strategy like that is appropriate in this situation, so that you're not blocked. We're not blocked, as it were, and we can sort of move on happily, and then at a later point in time reconvene as to where we are, trying to keep things as up to date as possible. So that's a bit of a random mix of things there, but I'll hand over to you two, because I haven't really been keeping up to date with these things. I've just seen a massive flurry of refactoring activity recently.
Yeah, first of all, let me explain the refactoring activity, and then I can give you a sense of our future plans for it. So I think all the refactoring is happening now for two reasons. One of which is that while we were working on scalability inside of GoPlease, we were trying to be very careful not to refactor things arbitrarily, which I think was probably a good idea, because we're both working simultaneously, and we were also mapping out the code base as we went. There were things that we didn't understand. So now that we have done that, we have like accrued a queue of refactorings that we had wanted to make along the way, and so we're flushing that queue. The other thing is that as part of the work on the zero configuration, some of the ways that things fit together had to be refactored, and so that's happening. I think we're close to the end, but that we're not done yet. We have things planned that we haven't made. We have changes planned that we haven't made yet. My goal is to get through those code moves by the end of the year, because I want to write a dev guide to GoPlease. This has been lacking for a while. I mean, we have something, but it's become very stale, and people who've worked on GoPlease in the past are less familiar with the code base now. It really needs a refresher. So I think that probably as like a holiday project, I will write up sort of a map of the code base and the rationale behind it, at which point I would expect those things to be relatively stable. With respect to sharing code, I think we are happy to meet with you whenever to share our knowledge. I think around the time that we write a dev guide would be a good time to have that meeting. And you're, of course, free to, and we can advise on what we think should be copied and what we think shouldn't be copied. I don't think we can, not that you suggested this, but we had talked about it in the past. Like, sharing code itself would be difficult for us because like we tried to fork the JSON RPC2 package into Xexp. And the problem with that is that we cannot import from Xexp. And it's really just, it's not feasible to have two implementations that we work on.
And to add to that, the actual version of JSON RPC that GoPlease uses is version 1, and there's a version 2 out there that we've been meaning to at some point move to.
Yes.
The version 1 we have is actually pretty stable, I think, but the version 2 promises a number of things that are better. Although, of course, migrating to it seems like it could be a period during which we flush out a bunch of bugs we haven't seen yet. So there's internal sort of things we still have to do to sort of to get the components that you might want to reuse into the sort of the form in which we would want to share them. JSON RPC2 seems like actually a really useful thing to share somewhere. Many of the other things seem much more esoteric. Like the protocol package is also useful. This is the LSP like types and methods. I think it'd be very useful to you, but it has a whole bunch of exceptions to the various rules of the sort of loose typing of the original TypeScript to adapt it to our users in Go. And they change from one version to the next. And I think basically it's a package that will break with every single update that you get from upstream, just because that's its nature. And so it wouldn't be abiding by the usual sort of Go compatibility promises. But it still might be useful as a sort of public package once we've eliminated as many as possible of the sort of weird GoPlease exceptions to the way in which we translate TypeScript types.
I'm slightly confused by the mentions of compatibility, because GoPlease is a v0 module, right? Mm-hmm. So I understand the internal to just be like a very strong signal to please don't use X or whatever package. But aside from that, compatibility shouldn't be an issue, right?
Paul, did you want to speak? So I think right now nothing inside GoPlease is public, so we have no sort of compatibility promise at all. But what I mean is that the the protocol package, you could imagine publishing a package that's almost exactly like the protocol package we have today, and its version number would probably track the version number of the upstream LSP releases, but it would be impossible to do that in a way that preserves the usual expectations about compatibility in Go, because it always creates breaking declarations in the source code from which that package is generated. So it's inherently sort of incompatible. So you'd have to always fix your client application every time you update that dependency.
Sorry, that was a poorly timed hand. I wasn't trying to answer Daniel's question. I was just trying to raise my hand.
Okay,
yeah, thanks, Rob. Just back to your point on, there's absolutely, I do indeed remember our conversation last time of me not at all trying to suggest we try and solve for exporting these things in any way, shape, or form. So again, that hasn't changed from our side. There's no hope or wish that that's the case, but just more that there's coordination, I think, from our side, just so that, again, we sort of see logical snapshots of things. We can sort of get a bit of a dialogue going as to when it makes sense. And as I said, perhaps using that Rog Pepe Go internal as an example of, well, how we might do it, just again trying to think about what might be a sensible way of doing it, so that we don't create a huge burden for ourselves, we don't create a problem for you, etc., etc. So just a bit of coordination there is really what I'm after. So that all sounds great and fantastic that you're sort of planning on targeting a dev guide for the holiday period. I think what I'll probably do from our side is actually use the period of December really then as an orientation time to hack together a basic version of something on our side from the server side. And as well, Rob, thinking back to I think it was some of the earliest work that you did on Go Please with the reg test package, whether that's actually changed its name or not, I couldn't honestly tell you right now. But I think that kind of thing is it is just phenomenal, because that was really that's going to give us the ability to, on our side with the LSP, actually create something with confidence right from the start, disconnected from something flaky like GoVim being at the testing environment.
Yeah, I think as Alan chimed in, we are planning to move that package because it's no longer just regression tests. It's the basis of all of our tests. And we would love to share some knowledge about testing, because that has been a long road for us. And there's a lot that we have learned. There's more that we'd still like to do, but we have learned a lot and backtracked and gone different ways. And we would hope that we can share that knowledge with you.
That would be absolutely wonderful. Again, I'll sort of pick up on that as I've sufficiently gotten back up the curve on where that is. I will literally, I think unless you sort of guide me otherwise, I think I'm going to hack something together as a starting point, really, so that we have a starting point from an actual server perspective, with some testing stuff hacked in there, really, just to see where we are to start with. Understanding that some packages may change, move, because of course, how I pick up changes from quotes upstream in this situation might change. How we do testing might need to change, but having a starting point actually enables us to move forward on getting an actual LSP implementation out there. And again, I guess there's some overlap as well with how you manage the release process, how you coordinate changes with the VS Code plugin, how those conversations with various editor plugin authors, whatever form they might take, happen as well. So it would be great to swap notes on all of this as we sort of get up to speed on our side.
Yeah, sounds great. I was just typing in chat, but yeah, Hannah can definitely offer some advice about maintaining a plugin and interacting with VS Code.
I hadn't seen that Hannah was on the call. Hi, Hannah. That would be great.
She's in her cat state.
Cool. If that's everything for this section, I think we should probably move to Command Go, which doesn't have any items, but I'm sure Brian has something to bring up.
I don't really have anything to bring up this time. We're mostly at this point, we're recovering from the forward compatibility changes from last cycle. So there's going to be, I think, a lot of focus this next year on fixing various bugs, patching bugs, a couple of things like that. And yeah, at this point, we're mostly trying to figure out what we're going to be working on for next year. So there's not a lot for this moment. There's past and there's future.
Any particular features or big changes in 1.22 that you want us to test, I wonder?
Nope.
Fair enough. I guess just check that things still work as usual. Cool. If that's everything for Command Go, then we have a single point under miscellaneous. That's Rogers, I believe.
Yeah, so this is maybe a silly question, or just it was just something that came up recently when I was investigating. Well, actually, I was investigating the Command Go code base, but it's quite often quite. You see that this particular case in the code is covered. You can run code cover. You can run all the tests, but then there's like, oh, actually, which test is? So I run all the Command Go tests, and like, okay, this particular line of this code is covered by one of those few hundred tests. Is there a straightforward way to answer the question of which line of code without, like, I guess the way of doing it is by enumerating all the possible tests, then running the test thing once by -run for every single test, and then look at the coverage for each one, and that feels kind of awkward, right? And is there a better answer? Could there be a better answer to that, or is it something that's kind of too niche, I suppose, and not something that's actually useful for that many people apart from me occasionally?
I think you should look at the cover modes, because the default cover mode I seem to recall is atomic for the coverage tool. And there's also another one that counts, so it increments a counter. But those counters are line-based, so it doesn't trace back to anything like the test name, right? So you would need a more sophisticated cover mode.
Yeah.
I don't think that exists. I think it could be proposed, but I also think it would be significantly heavier.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah, all these things. I mean, maybe I should just write some tooling to do it, because it's maybe rare enough that you could do it. You could automate it somehow. It would be.
It sounds like an
Heavyweight.
analog of BenchComp that they're comparing two benchmarks to see what changed. You're sort of trying to compare what changes between two profiles, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe that's true. Maybe that's.
You could just stick a panic in there. I mean, see which test failed. That's the most crude and direct way to do this.
That's actually true. Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably. Well, some tests is probably going to fail if you put a panic in there, isn't it? Yeah. Maybe I should just try that. Yeah.
So along the lines of Alan's suggestion, the compiler and runtime team has a bisect tool and some fairly sophisticated, like, hash-based mutation support, I think. I don't know a lot about how they actually use that to debug compiler issues, but I wonder if some of that bisection support, like, it's not bisecting over time, it's bisecting like down to which. They have a tool that's designed to figure out which function is being miscompiled that's causing something to crash. And I wonder if you could use that to also bisect to see which function is being compiled to cause a thing to be covered. I think that's basically automating the process of running the tests one at a time and comparing their coverage, but maybe from a slightly different perspective.
Yeah, because putting panics in is great if you've got one particular line of code, but if you want a general view of, then that's going to be.
So I think that writing a series of coverage reports out, the format's pretty easy to parse, and then just doing the computation on top of that shouldn't be hard for you.
Yeah. Thanks.
The compiler thing is very clever, by the way. It's basically a bit string of sort of decisions that sort of, as a compiler, which is a deterministic program, sort of goes through its execution. It can ask this bit string for, like, what should I do at this point, and it pulls the next bit off the stream and then does yes or no. And so you can, just by changing the bit string that you feed to the compiler, you can kind of cause it to exercise different paths through these sort of optional features, whether it should use an optimization for this function or not. It's pretty sophisticated.
Nice. Is that in the open source code, or is that?
So yeah, it's checked in. Yeah, you can set it with an environment variable. I think it's called. I can't remember what it's called.
I think it's GoSSA hash.
Cool. We've run to the end of the agenda, and we still have 20 minutes of time. So I'm gonna give one last chance in case anybody wants to add any last minute items to the agenda or bring anything else up. Cool. So then on to the day for the next call. I think it's pretty clear that we want to jump over the holidays because recently we've been aiming for like a month and a half, 2 months between calls, given the size of the agenda and the amount of people that join. So I propose Wednesday, the 17th of January. As far as I'm aware, that's not a well-known public holiday, and it's a couple of weeks after most people will, let's say it's the second week that most people will be back from holiday, so it seems reasonable to me. But if anybody has thoughts, let me know. Oh, and I just realized, where does that put us with the release cycle? I believe it's just before.
When the tree opens for 123, I think.
Yes, it is almost exactly when the tree reopens. Perfect. I planned that. Cool. So that's everything then. I'll just set up, I'll publish the recording as soon as I'm able to, as soon as it's ready and I can get to it. And then I'll set up the agenda for the next call and the calendar as well. And
Thanks, Dan.
I'll see you all in 2 months.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.